Hello and welcome to another episode of the Most Serious Podcast. And I think I would want to introduce Madhvi as to the audience as a guest who's worn again so many different hats, and she again joins the club of the guests who've been on the podcast, who've touched up on many different subjects in life and gone through different experiences, and then maybe are able to find their spot creatively or professionally where they want to end up. So thank you so much, Madhvi, for coming on the Most Serious Podcast. I am very excited to explore your life's journey on this show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And a big hello to your audience from my side. I can't wait to see where this conversation goes.
And I think before we started recording the conversation that we were having, that only tells me so much more about you. But let's give some insight to our audience as well. There is so much to talk about in your journey. I think you've done so many different things in life. But one question which, innately I'm curious about is, did you from childhood have any inclination of these broad fields that you've worked in: finance, a bit of marketing, some content writing, and insurance and things like that? Did as a child, a 12-year-old, 10-year-old Madhvi, did she have an insight into any of this?
The 10, 12-year-old Madhvi, all she knew is by the time I'm 25, I want a Jaguar. How
Like the animal?
Jaguar will come, the car, how this will come, what happened to get a car, all of that was not in my purview at all. I was not those kids who grew up thinking I'm going to have a massive career and I want to become that and this and the other. It was too lighthearted to think I'll be involved in so many things. I love writing in general, but I never thought of it as anything beyond something I love doing.
I never thought of going to these, huge institutions, Oxford and NYU, and no, not on your bucket list.
When I was a kid, I was the worst student. I couldn't stand studying, and I would sit with the same page open for hours, and my mother would come in and out of the room and be like, "You're still stuck on the same page." And when I went to college, my grandmother was like, "Just pass. I will, distribute laddus. मैं मंदिर में लड्डू बांटूंगी, तू pass हो जा बस." It lands up being that we're three of us siblings. I'm the most educated out of the three of us. That's the joke. Because I never thought I'll go do these courses or anything. It was just like finish studying and then that's it. I never want to do anything academic again. I think it's the story of never say never.
I think I can relate to you in that regard, and I personally also hated study. So, anecdotally, what used to happen, maybe, I don't know if you relate to this or not. So, I was a student who was very good at pretending that he knows stuff, but never really understood most of the things that were taught in school. So, I just am a very good actor when it came to school. I think school taught me just how to pretend that, okay, you're understanding this, but nothing went in here. So, my mom used to, when I remember in 6th, 7th grade, what used to happen was like, my mom was like, ki syllabus kitna hua hai, and she used to check up on me like a couple of days before the exam, and she used to find कि इसको तो कुछ भी नहीं आता. Like the whole year, what the hell has he been doing? And so I have an elder sister, and her job was, and my mom taught me like 2-3 days she used to make me just complete all the syllabus and all. So, and she used to give me a mock test or something like that. Ki, okay, you solve this whole exam, and your sister will check it because she didn't have a lot of time. So I used to literally plead my sister कि यार तू मत बताना मम्मा को कि मेरे इतने गंदे मार्क्स आ रहे हैं इसमें. But she never really gained that trust, and she always used to correct those exams rightly, and she used to tell mom कि इसको कुछ नहीं आता अभी भी. And then my mom used to make me sit through the entire night, and luckily because of her I was able to study whatever I did. I think I can completely relate to.
Yeah, no, I was a terrible student. मेरे को एक तो रट्टा लगाना नहीं आता था. I could not retain things like that. I had tutors since I was in class 6. And like everything, मतलब English की भी tuition थी. Because nobody could understand कि इसको पढ़ाते कैसे हैं. इसको समझ नहीं, like, I would not be able to just sit and mug it up and go like vomit it out on a paper. I could never do that. I needed to understand what they're teaching. So yeah, I think I was quite the task back in the day.
And now that you retrospectively look at that time in your life, maybe you were a kid and you were still figuring out a lot of stuff, but do you understand now like why were you facing those challenges? Was it because of the way that education was being presented to you, or way the system is designed?
I think now when I look back, I have nieces and nephews who I'm seeing go through school. And when I look back, I'm like, yeah, at that time the system didn't understand that children learn differently. I'm talking about way before even your time. I finished school in 1997, so you can go that far back. And there was only one style of teaching. They would open the book, you would read the textbook in the class, and that's it. Maths was taught, just they would just solve the sum, and that's it. Now I feel that they understand that different kids learn different ways. So I was that kid who used to listen to it. मेरे को कहानी के तौर में आप सुना दो, मैं सुन के मेरे को समझ आएगी, I'll retain it. But if you tell me, Madhvi, read it and now learn it and now repeat it back to me, I would be lost. So I think that was a problem in understanding that there are different ways of teaching different kids. So I feel that maybe I would have thrived today when you go to schools and they have different ways of like visual aids, and there are many ways of teaching. They're not just sticking to a text. I also realized that when I was doing my courses abroad, I actually fell in love with studying, and I'm like, who is this person? I don't know who you are. And that's because the style of teaching was so involved. They were involved with you, they were doing workshops, they would like you were getting the most out of that experience. So I think the style of teaching makes a lot of difference, which was missing maybe back then.
This is so similar to what I've heard from another person who was on the show, and he's Pranav Pai. He's the founder of 314 Capital. It's a VC firm, and he was saying the same thing about his education experience inside India versus outside. That the model is so different that he also figured that there's a completely different approach to how they look at studies outside. Like I, as a person who studied like in India only, I know that studies carry a negative connotation in my head. Instantly when I hear this word study, I'm tired already. I don't
Yes.
want to even start. And
Yeah.
studying anything requires that intent of excitement. Like you need to be curious first for you to sit down and study anything. Like else, what's the point?
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. And that's why, like, growing up, I hated history, for example. Like, मेरे को समझ ही नहीं आती थी, वो chronology नहीं याद रहती थी, Indian history, this history, that. As an adult, I can't get enough of, like, walking into a museum, listening to the
Yeah.
audio, seeing what's happening in terms of their visuals that they might have or paintings that happened in a certain era. I'm curious. As a child, I was not curious about those things. So I think you're right. A lot of it has to do with the kind of presentation that comes to us for us to get excited to be able to respond to that.
And this ties me, this gives me a platform to ask you this question on writing. Now that you have this insight on, how you were as a kid, or, how you are able to now understand that mindset, does this help you write better as an author? Does this help you to understand what reader might be expecting? Because because you've done both sides. You've written books for children and for people who are not children. But how do you play your learnings from when you were as a child and now that you've realized how people are more interested into consuming that content? Does this help you? Does this give you a perspective?
See, as far as writing is concerned, the most important thing is you being authentic to the audience. So you have to kind of understand who your audience is, who are you writing for. For example, with the Writer's Web, when we write for corporate content, it's a very different approach. But as an author, when I'm writing a book, it depends on my audience. Like I co-authored a book called Cupidity in 2016 with a friend. Cupidity was based on online dating in India. And there are 3 main characters, and we take you through their story. When we were writing Cupidity, I was very aware of like what my I shouldn't have any loopholes for my reader to find. As it is, you're reading a book, you're kind of absorbing what the storyline is. If you start finding loopholes, it gets very annoying for a reader. So I was very aware of that. I was aware of the fact that if I have said this character has walked into the room and they've taken a seat, and then I'm describing it for you to imagine it, I should not go straight to this character walked into the room and then the next conversation is happening where you miss the fact that she sat on a particular kind of chair. Like if I'm creating the whole picture for you, I must complete that picture for you. If the scene requires for me to describe what she's wearing, for example, I must do that for you as an author. So I think writing as a skill, as something that I was doing in passion as a kid, kind of brought that authenticity to me. I was always writing as if someone's going to read it. Not that I was writing to be read, but I was always writing thinking, अगर कोई पढ़ेगा तो उसको detail पता होनी चाहिए. And then when I wrote the children's book, it was a very different perspective. It was Fables to Table is basically potatoes telling children to travel within India. you know so these guys are going to Lakshadweep. Now how do I make it interesting for kids? Okay, let's bring in potatoes, and they're going to talk to each other, and there'll be facts, but in a funny conversation between these characters that are talking about themselves and what I'm a carbohydrate of this kind and all, but I'm making it fun for a kid. I'm not making it educational for a kid. And that kind of thing, the reviews I'm getting is they're having fun reading the book. So as a writer in any sphere, the authenticity of knowing who your audience is and then catering to that audience is very important. That you have to be really aware when you're writing कि कौन पढ़ेगा मेरा काम, उसको क्या मिलेगा उससे, how is this person benefiting from reading this. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you definitely did. And the most impactful sentence in all of your answer, which I felt, was that you wrote from a lens of as if someone was reading it and
Yeah.
not to be read, in a future sense. Like, I think that is something which you have to be very conscious of as a writer. Possibly that keeps you in check a lot, because possibly that gives you that consumer lens as well, in business terms, right? That you are not just creating a product that's in accordance to you, that's the best thing, but are you really sure of will it ever sell, or does anyone even want it? I'm not sure if those two analogies relate.
Let me bring this in. Every writer thinks they're writing the best thing they've ever written till they write the next thing and they'll be like, oh no, what did I write before? And then it keeps going there. So it's actually a very frustrating circle to live in, because you always think you've produced your best work and then you'll put it out there and you'll be like, hey, I can do better than this.
How do you deal with that? Does it ever get to your head, that self-doubt?
When I started the Writers Web and I was working, and then we had to put things out there, like if you're a client and you ask me to do some writing and it's done and the final draft is submitted to you, and I would come back to it 6 months later and I'd probably have a different angle on how I would write it. So the two things I said to myself is, one, nothing can be done. I did my best in that moment and I brought that forward and it was accepted. It was to the satisfaction of the client. But I also realized one very important thing, that for a writer, the editing never stops. So as a consumer, you might be satisfied with what I presented, and you'll be like, yeah, okay, it read well, it served its purpose. Even with regard to a book, right? It read well, it served its purpose, and I was happy. But if I revisit something I've written 5 years ago, I'll definitely be editing it. So I came to accept that a writer is a forever editor. You never stop trying to fix your work, ever. So once you accept that, no, it's a little more satisfying.
I think to some extent I can relate to what you're saying, and I've never written anything of substantial use in life. But in regards of this podcast, I feel that sometimes when I look at my episodes which I did, 2 years ago, it just cringes me out to see them.
Right?
I'm like, what? What are you
That's what I
wearing?
mean. That's what I mean. But then you make your peace with it. You'll be like, for that time, it was the best thing that happened, and the way it was served, it was a satisfactory dish. But I've evolved, so now work has also evolved with it. I think that's a healthy way of looking at.
So do you think that this is maybe a controversial question or not, but do you think everyone has a potential to be a writer or an author?
Everybody doesn't have the potential to be an editor. I'll give you that.
Okay.
And I do believe that every life has a very unique story to tell. However, writing is a practice.
Okay.
So you might get down your most authentic first draft down, and I think everybody's capable of that. It's just that people don't prioritize it. But I think there's professionals out there who can help you better your draft. So everybody is a writer for sure. Like I feel everybody is a singer, and people are like, you don't know what that means. I don't know tone. I said, no, but I think everybody can sing. So I feel everybody can definitely write their first drafts. But to make it a draft that's the absolute banging one, I think an editor is a must. Even I use editors when I'm writing my books and working on bigger projects. I like to fall back on an editor, because as a writer, I can only see it in a certain way. and I'll be repeatedly seeing the same thing, so I'll miss a few things that an editor will probably not miss. So it definitely needs help. It can be
And do
done
you
with help.
and do you have a cave like most writers? They for some time, whenever they're working on a big project, they disappear and then they come back with a finished piece or a draft.
It's so funny you say that. So when I turned 30, I gave myself a gift. I went to Oxford and I did a creative writing course. And over there, one of the professors, he had written a few books, and he said, my process is that I go up to my lake house alone without my family and I get this written. And I was like, this is such a cliche. Like, you can write sitting anywhere, because that was my experience. If I had a thought, everything else could shut down around me and I would be busy with my thought, right? And I can still do that. But when it comes to writing long form, like a book or somebody's article or something that needs kind of more attention from me, more concentration, I am ashamed to admit that I am part of that cliche. I have my place. I have a lovely little apartment in Goa, and I have a beautiful view of coconut trees. And that, for some weird reason, being in solitude over there, it just fuels the pace of the creativity. Like Fables to Table, the children's book, I'm giving you an example. I sat and did research on it. It took me 2 years. I kept thinking, acha likhti hu. I had the idea in my head, the characters took shape, this and that. I kept thinking, I'll just write it, I'll just write it, I'll just write it. 2 years in, when I finally sat on it in Goa, in a week, the book had rolled out of me. And I'm
Wow.
like, oh, now I understand what he said when he said he's sitting in solitude in his like lake house or mountain house or whatever. But I get it. Now I understand the impact of solitude and creativity, and the minute you hit that note, just go running.
And also to the lines of, I just remembered that because you're a person who's wore different hats, in your life, your experience, you spent almost a decade in finance. Like, how does that experience translate, or does it ever help you today what you're doing, or how do you view that? Because this speech that Steve Jobs gave, possibly at an institute, where he's like, you can always connect the dots looking backward, like what happened in life and what led you to do what you're doing right now. You can never connect them looking forward, like what might happen in the future and what might lead to learn. Do you agree with that? Is that a personal case study?
I 100% agree with it. I think it's not about success or failure, it's about the experience you carry. So if I look back at my own journey, my first, like stepping out of college, I did my bachelor's in business, and literally the same month as finished college, I started working in a company. It was a software company, and I was an employee. So it was it's right out of college, you get a job, you're working, and then I was on the different, opposite side of the table. And 2 years into that job, there was a big bust of the IT that had happened. This bubble burst, as they called it, and work became very quiet. So I got to join my family business, as you said, in finance. It's a stockbroking firm, and my mom's firm. And when I joined there, I came on the other side of the table. I became the boss. But I could be a better HR person. I could be a better communication person as a boss. I could be a better person understanding structure of a business, because I had been on the employee side of the table and seen a business from that perspective, and seen what an employee is going through, or what lacks, or what makes up for it, etc. That experience worked a lot on being the other side of the table. I've always believed that. And now, jumping from what you asked, from being part of management and seeing business through growth, and seeing business through changes that SEBI brought in, etc., and moving on to becoming an entrepreneur, what I carried with me, what worked as an advantage for me, for example, is the fact that because I had been in that space of business, I could address top management of companies very easily. So if I'm dealing with the chairman of a company, if I'm dealing with the founder of a company, the confidence that I had was actually separating me from the crowd. That brought me to a point where they were like, oh, she understands what we're talking about. I was not just somebody who was coming in as a communications team. Because when we started the Writers Web, people were like, what is content? Is it PR? Is it, what are you doing? And there was a lot of, there was a lack of understanding. And I'm like, no, I only write. I don't do the journalism bit. I don't do the marketing bit. I only write. That took a while. But the fact that I had come from a space of business myself gave me an advantage of being able to be understanding and be understood. So I think that really helps. So definitely your experience, ups and downs come, but your experience really puts you in the right place, I feel. And yeah, it worked in my space.
For me personally, hearing that, I think it, like I hear what you're saying, and I also realize that how those different pieces connect together for you and bring out this version of you, possibly which wouldn't have existed if either one of those didn't happen. But I think in my personal experience when it comes to writing again is like, so whenever I write, I just write in my journal, okay, and I am just proud of the things that I write there. Because I think for some reason, and maybe I can share some drafts with you and you can have some feedback. But so my favorite, I wouldn't say even favorite author, and I also don't have a lot of experience in reading, even though my mom was a librarian. But so what happens is that there was this author called Fyodor Dostoevsky, and my sister again, she's done her masters in English and probably will do her PhD as well in English. So I'm surrounded by people who are like full bookworms, but
Yeah.
so there's only this one author who I relate to the most, and it's called Fyodor Dostoevsky. And possibly I haven't even read all of his books, but in one book, Notes from Underground, he writes in such a honest manner. Like that book starts with the pretext of, I'm a sick man, I'm a spiteful man, my liver is diseased, but I won't go to the doctor, let it get even worse, and all of that. So for some reason, that raw authenticity with which he writes, and I think that I was talking to my sister about it, that I feel it very refreshing when I read a piece of text which almost feels like a thought inside my head. Okay, and of course there's structure, there's story, there's script to certain texts, but for some reason what clicks to me is that raw authenticity of how someone thinks. Like you and I, we think different, and possibly you like think different and write possibly in that way, but for some reason I can't just write what I think, because there are layers when it comes to writing. I filter out a lot of things. I won't write my thoughts because I'll feel like, is this useful? Is this not? Let me just, write the best sentences what I can put together. But in my experience, I've realized that I have a lot of fun when I just write raw authenticity and just blurt out my thoughts.
So there's an exercise they do when they're teaching you how to write is, it's like you put on a timer for 1 minute and your pen is not supposed to leave the paper.
Oh.
It's just like a vomit of everything you're thinking without giving it some thought. You just write, and you'll be amazed the kind of stuff that comes out in that. It's like a therapy session, but it's actually a writing workshop. So that I find that to be very helpful. But coming back to your point, why is it that someone, when they're authentic, that you like it? It's because there's relatability in that. Right? There's a relatability when someone is being vulnerable, because at some level, under all those layers that you're talking about, there's that same vulnerability. So it's very important for a writer to be authentic to their writing, but also relatable. Like I'm working on a current book, which is about life in our 30s. And the book stems from me writing in my 30s and then stuff that came out. And I was working with it, with an editor on it, because I had finished the book, but I thought it needed some help. And she and I have gone through like these sessions, and I'm not kidding, it felt like therapy. And it also was like, are you sure I should write this? It's so personal. And she's like, how else will your audience relate? And I'm like, that's also true. I have to be authentically what it was in that moment. Like I cannot misrepresent that moment, because I lose you like this. So it's that relatability that keeps you plugged in and pulls that thread correctly for you. So when you're writing, don't cut out those layers. Keep them in.
I think, yeah, I think I can share something with you, and then you can. So I've always, Madhvi, I've always wanted to be a writer. Okay, so I just love.
Really?
No, so see, I am a person who wants things but isn't willing to put any effort to them. So I am the laziest, ambitious person I think you'll ever find. The thing is that I wouldn't want my name to be, somewhere, like Ripudaman Bhardwaj, amazing writer, what stuff he writes. And that bubble I've built inside my head only. Possibly the text that you read, you're like, what? This
You're not
isn't
alone.
even,
We've all created that in our head.
not even
Bestseller.
coherent sentences.
Bestseller. This is a bestseller. Each page you write, you look at it and be like, क्या लिखा है ना?
For me, I'm the bestseller. Like I am just, and I think one of the reasons that I haven't put out my stuff is that it will break my bubble of me thinking that this is very good.
Being a writer is a very scary space.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right in thinking that because honestly, even fiction comes from fact. That's why, there's so many quotes around that yes, all fiction is based on fact. You'll even hear, be careful what you say to a writer. You never know where where you show up in their book. It's not all false. It's true. You could be in a plot where you're murdered because you had a certain conversation with an author and they're like, I don't like it, kill. They can do that in their book. But it really is like revealing the smallest and the innermost self while you're writing, because that's actually where it really hits the right nerve. So it's a tough thing, to be authentically connecting with the audience, because that means you're giving them part of yourself in that context.
I
When the
think
next book
one.
comes out, I'll send you a copy and you can kind of understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. I think one, this is very similar to again one conversation I remember on the podcast only I had with this person called Ryan Bush, and he also came. I think he was before you. He was the author that who was on the podcast. Like I think post him, you are the one who's come, and that was like 7-8 months ago. And so
Wow.
he had his book launch, and that was also he was talking a lot about self identity and like understanding who you are, and that book was also based around that. So I asked him a lot of questions on how being the person that how identifying yourself is a part of that creative journey. And he
Yeah.
talked at length about how important it is for me to first understand myself, and for me to understand my capabilities, my potential, and my image of myself, for me to then start thinking and writing about all of these texts that I write. So for me, that self discovery bit that you as a writer maybe collaterally just learn is one of the biggest possibly givings that it will ever give you, maybe financially or socially or whatever recognition that you get. But at the end of the day, maybe what is life fundamentally, then you start, once you have that self discovery kind of element kicking in from writing, I think that's one of the biggest gifts it gives you.
So I think coming back to what you said earlier, there are layers within everyone, and when you're writing, you're constantly peeling those layers off. So I agree with him that it's a process of evolution. You keep discovering more and more about yourself as you keep writing more. Things get clearer, they get sharper. You're able to go to the next level of sharing because you have had that clarity come through. So, when they say, oh, writers and you overthink and you solitude, all those cliches are true, man. They work. They work. But it also depends on the genre you're writing. When you're writing in the genres that he's talking about or that I work within, it does take a lot of that work. But I'm not the authority on what it's like to write like fantasy fiction, for example. I don't know how much of the authentic self will be required in that kind of genre of writing. But definitely, peeling off layers is just part of the process of just getting sharper in tune with who you are as a character, to be able to refine the character in the book, even if it's not a fiction novel. So yeah, all of these things, cliches that they say about authors, they're absolutely true. Have, I used to laugh at them. I am discovering with time that they're absolutely bang on.
What is your perspective on the future of this space with things like chat gpt and with things like large language models and the way consumption happens, like, right, entertainment has now so many different forms of consumption. People consume a lot more videos and a lot more visually stimulative content, which is not as um, what, hard to follow as a piece of text, maybe, because and why I say hard to follow is just because of attention. Like, you need to stay on that page, on that sentence, on that word for you to understand the next one. How does your mind interpret what's coming for the future?
So this conversation about text not being, consumed anymore has been happening for the past 15 years at least, right? Even for your videos, for example, for everything, you need to create the scene. You need to do that writing, whether it's consumed in writing format or video format. Is not the first step is still the same. You have to write down the scene. Even for a podcast, you have to write down the questions and the direction that you're taking. Back in the day, the conversation was, will books still exist, versus like when the format changed to digital format. There is an audience for everything. The population of this world is too big to not have that happen. So I don't think text is going anywhere, and I don't think physical books are going anywhere either. I'm a total example of that. Like, my work is constantly on my screen. Like, my everything happens over email and everything happens on my laptop. But when I have to read a book, I find it to be cumbersome to read it on a digital platform. I rather have a physical copy. You'll never see me travel without at least one book in my handbag. Okay, so
Can
there's
you
an
just tell me
audience
the
for
meaning of cumbersome?
as in it is irritating. It's
Oh, okay.
irritating. Yeah, like a little bit of a irritant. Uh, that's not the exact meaning, but it's the same feeling.
Yeah.
And then, I've never prescribed to the. I have many books on my Kindle, but I will buy the same book. Like a moron, I'll do the Kindle version and the physical version, and I'll pick up the physical version and read it. I feel like I've accomplished something when I've gone through a physical book. As far as the using AI in your daily existence, it's bound to happen. I do feel the writer's web is threatened by it. I don't think it's the end of the writer's web, because there will still be people who want to be authentically their own voice and maybe understand the value. I've always struggled with this, by the way. People understand the value of what a content solutions provider does,
Yeah.
because you're not a marketing firm, you're not a digital firm, you're not a social media solution provider, you're not a PR person. What are you doing? But the people who understood what I'm doing have been clients for the past 8-10 years, right? So there is, like I said, an audience for everything. ChatGPT is making everybody's lives easier. I don't think the writing is that authentic. I think it'll take some time for us to see where this goes. I'm not saying that it's not a great tool. I don't use it for obvious reasons, but there are no lines right now in terms of plagiarism. In terms of, I'm not talking about like college applications. I'm talking about beyond that. I could have somebody could just roll out an entire book on ChatGPT, and you and I can't challenge it really clearly at the moment. Maybe those things come out clearer later. So it's a little bit of a scary space, if you ask me, as all technology has been whenever we've approached it. But yeah, I don't think it's the end or the doom of a certain way of doing things or being a certain way, because consumers are of all kinds.
And I also think for some reason when you were giving your answer, a thought popped up in my head that this question that I've asked, it has faced the test of time for what, 2000, 3000, 5000 years, because text is the only form of inheritance
Yes,
outside of materials that we've inherited from our ancestors,
yeah.
and it
Pen
has
is mightier
withstood.
than the sword, and that has been true. Shakespeare still relevant. He was not relevant in his own time as he is now. History has been consumed like that. You can go back to the Vedas. Everything is in written form. How you produce it might change. You might make a movie out of it. But text is text. Script is script. You can't go off it.
I've always wanted to ask this to a author वैसे, but why do these authors always are underappreciated in their time and then overappreciated once they're gone?
I don't know. It's so annoying, no? Because I don't want to think that my work will be appreciated after I'm gone. Like, optimism is not something you aspire for in life. I don't know. I think it's a timing thing. That I think that's a creative challenge. Like even art, they were not appreciated as much as they are appreciated now. They're not value wise. It came much later on. I wish I had the answer to this question because I've asked this question many times and been frustrated by it. कि ये जब मैं मरूंगी तो चलेगा मतलब क्या है? No, but it's an everlasting thing. I should hope that intelligence has changed now as compared to those times where only if royalty said it was good back in the day was it accepted. For example, Shakespeare's time or Mozart's time, etc. But yeah, times are different. Everybody has an opinion, and everybody's freely handing it out. So one should hope that that kind of helps all kinds of creative talent.
Yeah, and I think their work also, it's a great reminder that their work has outlived them for so long that like the value that so many people derived out of their texts, maybe they never got the satisfaction as authors, but the service that they did, like it's greater than so many other services that people just,
I couldn't
a
agree more.
life lived for yourself.
Their work is still inspiring. Imagine thousands of years
Yeah.
later that someone wrote something or someone painted something and it's still aspiring. I mean, inspiring people to aspire to achieve that. Like, I think that's just another level. Those are masters for a reason. Can't compare to those, can definitely learn from them. And I think that's why they've become such an integral part of the learning experience. But yeah, their stories are, you're right, it's like an everlasting thing. It never dies. And it's been translated in so many languages. People have adapted, like Shakespeare plays are still being adapted. It doesn't get old. You and I could probably go watch the same play again and again, different casts and whatever have you. But it's so amazing that that their creativity still lives.
I think one play I saw, I don't remember if it's the correct one, and I'm always very scared to, make any kind of, what do you call it? Make any sentence related to an author because people get so triggered. And my sister, she bashes me a lot on this कि तेरे को ये नहीं पता ये किसका ये and Shakespeare के sonnet वगैरह. I have no clue. So I just watched this play. I think it was Comedy of Errors. Did
Oh
Shakespeare
yeah,
write it? Yeah.
yeah.
So I watched a Hindi adaptation of it by. Gulzar was it? I don't remember if that's his correct name, but that was again so funny because uska Hindi adaptation, and I was laughing throughout that play, and that was possibly my first or second time I went for a play. But I realized that that person 400 500 years ago thought of an idea or a script or whatever, and I'm still laughing to this day to that idea of one imagination that he had. Like that is just so crazy how creative work transcends lives, time, and just this whole fabric of reality that we live in.
You really ask me now, what is it that you're wondering? I'm wondering, what was this person high on when they wrote this piece?
I want that.
I want to know what they were having to have this kind of brilliance pop out.
I just don't think they make that stuff anymore.
Possibly.
Potency dies
But
down.
yeah,
But
timeless work.
so what's next for you, Madhvi? I think this has been such a fun conversation, and I had so much fun talking to you that I didn't realize that I am very scared of authors and I'm possibly not messing up the correct words in front of them, but felt very comfortable talking to you. What's next for you?
Like, well, I've started ghostwriting people's biographies, which I think is, like I told you, I think every life is unique. For me, it stemmed from a project that I did for a company in the UK, and they wanted someone to interview a retired general from the army over here, and it was COVID days. And we did the entire, he was a 90 plus gentleman, and we did the entire conversation over Zoom. Like all my interviews were conducted on Zoom with him. But the whole process was so satisfying. And all I had to do with this company is just do the interview part. And I went to them in the UK and I said, let's collaborate, let's bring it here. But they are more interested in UK and the US as a audience, so they said not right now. We'll talk about it. Didn't I mean it didn't work out, but that whole process was so rewarding for me that I'm like, I want to try and do something like that myself, you know. So kind of created the process and created the product called the Heirloom that came out of this whole experience. And it's been so much fun because business writing is very dry. You know, if I'm doing a website or if I'm doing a report or if I'm doing, press release that's going out or whatever, that's what it is. Annual report, that's what it is. There's no creative journey in that. But this was just so rewarding as a process that I said, no, I must do this. So now we've started doing that. We've done and a couple of people wanted to do milestone things. So, 50th birthday. This husband wanted to give his wife a 50th birthday present. And he's like, this is such a unique thing. Can we do something? So we've been creating all these different books. And so it's been really exciting. And I think that's where Writer's Web will always be, my first love. But this is also pulling me because the process of sitting with someone and hearing their life journey and, just seeing them go through it again is so much fun that I'm just looking forward to more and more of these kind of books.
Do you have a age benchmark for a client?
Yeah, someone
I'm just trying to sneak myself in.
a good amount of life. Like a client of mine said, let's do my book. I said, no, you're only 50 right now. You don't qualify.
Shit.
Thodi zindagi ji lo.
No, but I think such a unique idea. I feel that you should double down on it. I think there are so many people
Right?
whose stories just gets untold.
And you know what the biggest one for me was, I think that hit home was this gentleman has witnessed so much in terms of partition, in terms of life after that. And I said, this generation, when they go and their story is not documented, there's no way of knowing. I mean, you and I will not, thank God, see such times where, what they went through in terms of partition and war and, all that they had to deal with. And so for me, that really hit home कि आपके दादाजी नानाजी ने जो कहानियाँ जो वो सुना पाएंगे कोई नहीं सुना पाएगा और उनके साथ वो कहानियाँ चली जाएंगी. Like now I feel bad that I didn't document things of my grandparents. So I think that also kind of struck a chord with me somewhere when I was doing that project for the company in the UK. Is that, my God, look at this story. It's so amazing. And he's seen so much in his life. And had his son not wanted to document it, it would have gone with him. So I think that's a great generation. They've seen so much. And they're so resilient. That's so much to learn from that. So, I'm very keen that people actually, look at it like that and actually that's true legacy for me. It's not your assets, it's not the achievements, it's actually these stories of your grandparents because of we are where we are, that to me are treasures.
Yeah, I think that's what legacy is all about. Assets, like possibly 100 years from now, like who remembers? Like possibly none of these assets even exist. This mic gets whatever. Like your car possibly doesn't exist 100 years from now, and
Not at
the
all.
thing that only has carried over is those stories. Like I can now hear stories from my grandma about some things possibly happened in her day. That's all. That is, materialistically, that's that what stands the test of time. So I just feel it's such a cool thing that I would love to see more of your work on this. But it was super awesome to talk to you, and I think thank you so much for coming on the More Serious podcast. Everyone enjoyed.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to have been here. Time just flew with you. It's so easy to chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madhvi.